Back in the day when it came to porting a console game to the Game Boy Advance, the end result would often be a very scaled back and oftentimes completely different experience to the original. Aside from sharing a few similarities, these games were typically so different from their console counterparts, they were barely comparable, and I really hope I wasn't the only one who got burned by this as a kid, wanting a game so desperately on a console you didn't own, so you pick up the GBA version and it just wasn't what you wanted at all. Fucking so many times. This video is meant as a tribute to those hard-working game developers who went that extra mile when porting their games to the Game Boy Advance. Not content with a shallow 2D imitation of the original game, they would go all out and craft a fully 3D and faithful port. Welcome to Port Patrol, the show where I look at weird, interesting, or knockoff ports of video games, and today we're taking a look at 3 different, impressive, graphically intensive, and overall just pretty cool 3D GBA ports. Whenever I think of GBA racing games, I normally think of stuff like Mario Kart. Okay, I don't actually think about GBA racing games that much, funnily enough, I'm not that weird. But most GBA racing games would mimic the style of an old Mode 7 game from the SNES, and although they are technically 3D, I mean come on. For this video, we're gonna have to do better. So when I saw the advert for Need for Speed Underground as a kid, I knew I had to get it. I never actually did get it in the end, so this is my first time playing it. Yeah, not really sure why I wrote that down. Released about a month after the console versions, Need for Speed Underground was developed by Pocketeers, a studio so obscure that the only nugget of information I could find out about them was on the Need for Speed wiki. Something I love about these games is just how beautifully dated they are. And I don't mean that in a visual or gameplay sense, although I do absolutely mean it in that sense as well, but just the entire underground cartooning culture it's based around screams the early 2000s to me. The customization, the nighttime street racing, the soundtrack that consists of 50% rap music and 50% heavy rock yet still somehow works together. It all seems just so wonderfully outdated now, and all of it has been preserved in the GBA game, including the soundtrack. I don't know how they managed to do it, but the game features like 4 or 5 full-length songs, and in good enough quality that the lyrics are still understandable. I'm not going to play any of it, because I don't want to get a copyright strike, but just imagine a pretty low quality version of
Lil Jon and the East Side Boys Get Low.
And you get the idea. If I had to describe how the cars handle in this game, which, let's face it, I probably should, the cars in this game don't really handle like they do in the actual Need for Speed Underground. That game was very fast and nippy. You would press the thumbstick a little and you turned instantly. This game, however, controls more like Grand Theft Auto 4. I know that sounds weird, but it is honestly the best description I can think of. The handling is very heavy, meaning you have to hold down the D-pad for a while to actually begin turning, and just like GTA 4, you can throw your car around like it's on soap. It's worth noting I don't mean this in a negative way. Once you start upgrading your car, you get an amazing sense of speed, and hurling your car through the corners with this heavy steering is super satisfying. What's also nice to see is that the AI in this game clearly play by the same rules you do, so you don't feel disadvantaged in any way. You can bump them around, crash them off course, and they even make very human mistakes like crashing into traffic. Nothing feels worse than playing a racing game, and it's so obvious that the opponent racers don't follow the same physics and rules that you do. The fact that this game gets that right is surprising, but definitely in a good way. It follows the same structure as the main game, so you're climbing up the ranks of the underground racing scene, earning cash as you win races, so that you can improve your car's performance and get some sick body mods. Wow, just look at that bumper. It can get a little repetitive, all the tracks taking place in one city with a lot of overlap between routes, but this was also a problem with the original game, so I can't really knock it here. Thankfully, there are 4 different game modes to help break up that grind. There's circuit races and sprint races for those who like to have fun, and for those who don't, you'll be very content with the drag and drifting events. Surprisingly, for someone as negative as me, I have very little to fault this game on. It plays well, it offers up a lot of content, and, well, as someone who's yet to play the other Need for Speed games that were on the GBA that came after this one, I'd go as far to say it's probably one of the best racing games on the GBA, as long as you ignore the fact that all the games that came after this one are probably better. Taking a quick break from racing games, it's time to take a quick look at some obscure cartoon characters. Asterix and Obelix come from a French comic strip dating back to 1959, which apparently some people still care about because it got some video games made about it.
Greetings! Please don't hit me!
As you might have guessed, I know absolutely nothing about this franchise, and I can barely pronounce their names. But what I can tell you is that it got a pretty awesome 3D GBA port in 2004 called Asterix XXL. Or Asterix and Obelix XXL if you can read, like I apparently can't. Which was published by Atari and developed by a 2-man team known as VD Dev. This team is known for some of the most ambitious and insane ports out there, ranging from a fully open world driver-free GBA port to the graphical powerhouse Ironfall Invasion for the 3DS. As a purveyor of weird ports, I would absolutely love to cover some of their other games at some point, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Asterix XXL is an incredibly impressive game, pulling off something I don't think I've seen pulled off on the GBA before. A full 3D platformer. And it actually does a pretty good job at it. Graphically, it manages to not look like complete ass. It's very nice and colourful, and although the player and enemies are just 2D sprites, they are well animated and do the job well enough. Things can get a little bit weird towards the edges of the screen, which I'm guessing has something to do with the limitations of how their 3D engine worked? Maybe? I honestly have no clue, and sometimes sprites just appear in front of the terrain they're supposed to be behind, but hey, all things considered, this is a very solid looking game, which wouldn't have looked out of place had it been released on the PS1. That was meant to be a compliment. I'm not really sure if it came across as one though. As pretty as it is to look at though, gameplay wise it's pretty standard. It's a typical 3D platformer with combat sprinkled in here and there. While platforming feels tight and precise, the combat really just consists of you mashing B in the vague direction of the enemy until they die. It is incredibly simplistic and incredibly repetitive, with nearly all levels following the same standard layout. Platform, fight enemies, flip switch, jump on new platform, repeat. But despite that, I kind of enjoyed my time with this game. It may be simplistic, but that doesn't mean it can't be fun. There's a decent amount of collectibles to get, and to the game's credit, it does get more complex as it goes on, adding combos to the combat system and items such as torches for the player to use. But in all honesty, there isn't much else for me to talk about. It's a pretty simple game to describe, and its main point of interest is its graphics. And well, you've been looking at those the entire time, I don't need to say much more. I would definitely recommend playing this game if you can. Like I said, a game being simple doesn't stop it from being fun, and couple that with the novelty of playing a 3D platformer on a GBA, then you get a pretty enjoyable experience, albeit one that is only really remarkable due to the console it was released on. If this was actually a PS1 game like I said it looked like, then it really wouldn't be that remarkable at all. I wanted to leave the most impressive game till last, and that means we are diving back into the world of racing games. Specifically, a game where you drive a taxi at insane speeds while doing ridiculous stunts. That's right, we're talking about the all-time classic arcade taxi racing game, Smashing Drive. What, did you expect something else? Smashing Drive is a 2000 arcade racing game made by some company I've never heard of, and it received absolutely killer scores when it was ported to home consoles in 2002. Now, I know I'm not selling this game very well right now, but just you wait till you see what the absolute madmen at Raylight Games, creators of such all-time classics as Mahjong Deluxe Free and My Little 3D Baby. Just you wait and see what they did for Smashing Drive when they ported it to the Game Boy Advance. It's honestly hard to believe they'd go on to make My Little 3D Baby after making this. This has to be one of the most impressive games on the system, surely. Not only does it have an absolute crap ton of stuff on screen at once, including detailed environments and full 3D traffic, but there's an almost unprecedented level of freedom in how you move around in this game. As long as you don't want to go backwards. You can't do that. Glide over traffic, cut through pipes, smash through buildings, climb up skyscrapers while plowing a giant ape in the nuts. Before going into the skyscraper, crashing down the elevator shaft and coming out the other side. Holy crap, Smashing Drive does not let up even for a second. It's like a Super FX game on steroids, and I absolutely love that in every way possible. As you might have guessed from the gameplay and the fact I said it was an arcade game, Smashing Drive is very arcade-y. It's sentences like that which prove why I should never take several month-long breaks from YouTube again. It's simple to control, very light and floaty, making it a great game to just pick up and play, and then put down again, because if you're like me, you finished it in 20 minutes. But hey, apart from the arcade mode, there's also survival mode, which as far as I could tell was exactly the same as arcade mode, but you can actually game over. So yeah, it's basically a 20-minute experience. That is honestly the worst part about Smashing Drive. It is a much nicer game to look at than it is to play. Graphically, it is absolutely mind-blowing, and it is incredibly faithful to the original. But then you also remember how good those scores were for the console versions, and I can kinda see why. Now, arcade games like this thrive on their replayability, and if chasing high scores is your type of thing, then you'd probably get some fun out of this game. There's lots of different power-ups to collect, and there's loads of shortcuts in the levels. By all means, I would recommend anyone play this game, even just to experience what you're seeing on screen for yourself. It's definitely fun to play through the first time, but the novelty of playing it will soon wear off, and you'll quickly find little reason to go back and play it again. It's a case of it being a great port of a not very great game, and while that is a bit of a sad note to end the video on, it's not quite as sad as the fact that I'm back from my hiatus and I'm gonna be uploading regularly again. That might be sadder, to be honest.